Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're taking a truly fascinating journey into one of the most dramatic historical narratives ever recorded, Isaiah chapter 24. Now, at first glance, this chapter, well, it kind of feels like a dense, apocalyptic riddle, right? But as we unpack it together today, you'll see how it maps ancient poetic prophecy directly to the devastating real-world conquests of Assyria, Babylon, and Rome. It's an absolute masterclass in how spiritual warnings manifest in historical reality. Don't worry, we've broken this dense text down into 6 logical sections to make it super easy to digest. Empty lands and scattered people, the broken everlasting covenant, the remnant in exile, fear, pit, and snare, punishing the high ones, and finally, sun and moon confounded. Let's get into it.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Empty Lands and Scattered People.
The chapter opens with this stark, terrifying vision of complete destruction, which really sets the stage for everything that follows. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 1 states, "Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof." Now, quick pause here. This is absolutely crucial. When the text says earth here, it's not talking about the entire globe. No, historically and scripturally, earth in this specific context refers directly to the nations of Israel being literally emptied out, their governments completely turned upside down.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact timeline of these events. This scattering abroad wasn't just some poetic metaphor. It was a brutal, historical reality carried out in massive waves by vast empires. First up, you have the Assyrians scattering captives around 722 BC. Then Babylon comes in around 587 BC. And ultimately, the lands were emptied even more completely by the Romans, peaking around 70 AD and really finalizing after 132 AD, when they literally forbade Jews from living in Samaria, Galilee, and Judea.
And you know, this devastation, it was the ultimate equalizer. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 2 states, "And it shall be, as with the people, so with the priest, as with the servant, so with his master, as with the maid, so with her mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller," and so on, listing lenders and borrowers. The point Isaiah is making here is crystal clear. This impending judgment spared absolutely no one. It didn't matter how rich you were, your social status, your religious title, the whole shebang. Everyone was swept up in it or carried away captive.
Moving right along to Section 2, the broken everlasting covenant. So we gotta ask ourselves, looking back at this history, what could possibly trigger such total, sweeping devastation across an entire nation? Well, Isaiah answers this head on. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 5 states, "The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant." This wasn't just random geopolitical bad luck. The people essentially brought a curse upon themselves by abandoning their spiritual foundation. The very ground they walked on was considered defiled by their actions. But what exactly is this everlasting covenant? Actually, it's referring straight back to the law of Moses. Think back to the book of Deuteronomy, specifically chapters 4 through 28, which laid out all these detailed instructions for sacrifices and feasts. Moses explicitly warned the children of Israel in Deuteronomy 29 that if they turned their backs on the Lord, they'd be rooted out of their land in anger. So by breaking these laws, they basically activated the exact curses they were warned about centuries earlier. Crazy, right? Okay, Section 3, the remnant in exile. Now, despite all this heavy devastation, famine, pestilence, war, the works, a tiny fraction of the people did survive, and Isaiah paints this survival with incredibly poignant imagery. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 13 states, "There shall be as the shaking of an olive tree and as the gleaning grapes when the vintage is done." I mean, picture an ancient harvest. The workers have already picked the vines clean, and there's just a few isolated grapes left behind, or maybe a couple of olives clinging to the branches after the tree's been violently shaken. It perfectly captures the tragic depopulation of Judah, leaving just this tiny remnant behind.
But here's the thing. That tiny remnant, they find a way to endure. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 15 states, "Wherefore glorify ye the Lord in the fires, even the name of the Lord God of Israel in the isles of the sea." Isaiah is prophesying that these survivors are going to continue to glorify God, even in the absolute furnace of their affliction, even while scattered in captivity.
So the crucial point is how this geographically split the survivors into 2 main groups. The fires points to the lands of light, or the sun rising, to the east. These are the folks dragged off as captives to Babylon. On the flip side, the isles of the sea represent the west.
These are the exiles who fled toward Egypt, Asia Minor, and the coasts of Greece. And here's a mind-blowing historical fact. This massive dispersion actually established synagogues all over the ancient Mediterranean world, which centuries later became absolutely instrumental in preparing those distant nations to receive Christianity. Talk about playing the long game.
All right, Section 4, Fear, Pet, and Snare. Let's pull back into the immediate timeline of the invasions. We're talking about a rapid, inescapable domino effect of disasters brought on by the treacherous dealers, meaning the barbarian invaders of Assyria and Babylon. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 17 states, "Fear and the pit and the snare are upon thee, O inhabitant of the earth." This is where Isaiah uses this incredibly vivid, terrifying imagery of a hunter relentlessly tracking its prey.
Let's walk through how this hunter metaphor works. Step 1 is the fear, the sheer panic of a startled, hunted animal running for its life. Step 2, running blindly, they fall into the pit. This represents being besieged, trapped inside city walls. Step 3, if they somehow try to climb out of the pit, they get caught in the snare, meaning ultimate capture. And we see this played out perfectly in history. In 586 BC, King Zedekiah panicked, fled the besieged pit of Jerusalem at night, but got chased down into the plains of Jericho, where he was snared, blinded, and dragged to Babylon in chains, literally fulfilling the prophecy word for word. The total collapse is summarized perfectly right here. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 20 states, "The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage." Now, earlier in his writings, Isaiah had prophesied that Jerusalem would be left like a cottage in a vineyard, spared from the Assyrians around 701 BC, and it was. The cottage survived. But here, he says that cottage is going to be completely removed. Judah would reel, fall, and be utterly destroyed by Babylon and later Rome, rising no more in that era. Which brings us to Section 5, punishing the high ones. But, history is a long arc, and the empires that caused all this suffering, they weren't getting off scot-free. Isaiah chapter 24, verses 21 and 22 state that, "The Lord shall punish the host of the high ones, and they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit." God promised to hold the proud, arrogant kings and ecclesiastical leaders of Babylon accountable for oppressing the nations. They too would eventually become slaves, thrown together right into the pit of a prison. Now, what's really interesting about this is this specific number 70. The text notes that these prisoners would be shut up, but after many days shall they be visited. And if we look at the history books after exactly 70 years of bitter oppression as slaves in Babylon, the remnant of Israel was finally visited by the Lord and released to go back and rebuild. Just incredible timing. And finally, Section 6, Sun and Moon Confounded. Let's slow down for a second, because we are hitting the majestic climax of the chapter. We're deliberately shifting our perspective here from the gritty dirt of historical warfare to this triumphant cosmic theology that closes out Isaiah's vision. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 23 states, "Then the moon shall be confounded, and the sun ashamed, when the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion, and in Jerusalem, and before his ancients gloriously." This is super famous apocalyptic imagery, but what does it actually mean? Are the literal sun and moon up in the sky going to be blushing and embarrassed? No way. To really grasp this, we have to decode the symbolism. In ancient scriptural context, comparing rulers to celestial bodies was standard practice. The sun, moon, and stars represented the absolute highest earthly powers, the mighty kings, the powerful religious leaders, or massive, seemingly untouchable empires like Babylon. So Isaiah is telling us that when Babylon finally falls to the Persians and Medes and God delivers his people, the glory of that deliverance is going to absolutely outshine the greatest human powers. The mighty sun and moon of human empires will look completely pitiful by comparison.
Which leads us to our final takeaway. The Lord's glory permanently outshines earthly empires. Through this explainer, we've watched Isaiah map profound spiritual truths directly onto gritty historical reality, tracking the emptying of the land from the Assyrian invasions to Babylon, all the way to Rome. So it leaves us with a pretty heavy question. When we look at our world today, what unshakable modern institutions or powers might need to learn a vital lesson from the ancient dust of Babylon and Rome? Thanks for hanging out and exploring Isaiah 24 with me today. Keep seeking, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.